Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. It started on a Friday night when Emily came home late, her face flushed and her makeup slightly smudged. She gave me a half-hearted hey, and went straight to the kitchen to grab water. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. Married life has its rhythms, and I knew she'd been out with friends. But something felt off. Her hair was messy, her dress wrinkled, and her shoes were dangling loosely from her hands. Then, as she bent over to grab something from the fridge, I noticed she wasn't wearing underwear. My stomach tightened, but I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I watched as she chattered about her night, clearly trying too hard to act normal. She dropped her bag on the counter, and as she went to shower, curiosity and fear gnawed at me. I grabbed her phone, hands shaking, and opened her messages. My worst fears materialized on the screen. A man named Jake had sent a string of messages, some flirty, some explicit. The timestamps showed they'd been chatting while she was out with the girls. My heart sank further as I scrolled through the photos they'd exchanged, pictures she hadn't sent me in years. I could feel my chest tightening as anger and betrayal surged through me. But I didn't confront her, not yet. I needed clarity, a plan, and most importantly, control. I couldn't sleep that night. Emily was lying in bed beside me, her back turned, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. I pretended to sleep, but my mind was racing. Every laugh, every excuse, every late night suddenly felt suspect. The messages were clear enough. Emily had been seeing Jake for at least a few months. Their conversations ranged from casual banter to intimate plans. What stuck with me most was one message she sent just hours earlier. I wish I could stay longer. You make me feel so alive. Alive? Wasn't that supposed to be my job? I stared at the ceiling, feeling like my chest was caving in. How long had I been the second choice? How long had I been the backup plan while she got her thrills elsewhere? The next morning, I tried to act normal. I kissed her on the cheek, made breakfast for us and the kids, and watched her carry on as if nothing had changed. The whole time, I kept my emotions in check, watching her every move, every word. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was survival. That day, while Emily was running errands, I sat at the dining table with her phone. I'd quietly watched her type in the passcode the night before, pretending not to notice. I unlocked it and went straight to her chat with Jake. It was worse than I thought. There were hotel confirmations, explicit photos, and plans for getaways. Jake wasn't just some fling, he was part of her double life. My hands trembled as I scrolled, but I knew I needed this. I forwarded screenshots to my email, cataloging everything. I didn't know if I'd use it for legal purposes, or if I'd just want the truth burned into my mind for when I inevitably confronted her. But something inside me whispered, don't confront her yet. She'll deny it. She'll manipulate you. You need to be prepared. That night, while Emily was in the shower, I logged into our joint bank account. My suspicions deepened when I noticed charges for expensive dinners and boutique hotels I'd never heard her mention. Emily had always handled the household budget, but now I realized why. She wasn't just cheating on me emotionally, she was using our money to fund it. The anger boiled inside me, but I had to stay calm. I transferred a portion of our savings into a separate account I'd quietly opened a year ago for emergencies. Now, it seemed like this account might become my escape fund. I started small. Every day after work, I packed a few essentials and stashed them in a duffel bag in the trunk of my car. Clothes, cash, important documents, all the things I'd need if I had to leave in a hurry. I didn't want her to notice anything missing, so I only took what wouldn't arouse suspicion. I also started making calls, scouting apartments 2 states away, checking rental agreements, and ensuring I had a safe landing spot when I made my move. I told her I was working late when, in reality, I was visiting a storage unit where I'd started moving larger items. If Emily noticed anything was off, she didn't show it. In fact, she seemed more distant than usual, glued to her phone most evenings, occasionally smiling at messages she was reading. I didn't have to guess who they were from. She even started dropping excuses that made me sick. Jake's wife is in town, so I can't talk much, she texted one night. Jake's wife? The level of deceit was staggering. Not only was she lying to me, but she was participating in a web of lies so complex I could barely keep track of it all. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, when I overheard Emily on a phone call, that I realized it was time to act. She was in the living room, speaking in hushed tones. Yeah, he's been clueless, she said, laughing quietly. Honestly, I think I've got him wrapped around my finger. I froze in the hallway, my fists clenched at my sides. I didn't hear the rest of the call. I didn't need to. She thought I was an idiot, a placeholder in her life. She had no idea the foundation beneath her lies was crumbling, piece by piece. That night, while she slept, I placed the note on the kitchen counter. It was short and to the point. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. By dawn, I was gone. No confrontation. No theatrics. Just quiet, calculated escape. The night I left was quiet. I'd planned it that way. Emily didn't even stir as I slipped out of bed, grabbed the duffel bag I'd been packing for weeks, and walked out the front door. I paused for a moment on the porch, the cool night air hitting my face, before turning to look at the house one last time. It was strange. This place that had felt like home for so many years now looked like a stranger's house. I didn't feel sadness. Just a hollow, empty calm. The note was on the counter, where I knew she'd find it. I didn't say much. There was no point. I wrote, "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." It wasn't dramatic, but it said everything I needed to say. I got in the car and drove, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror. I didn't look back again. By the time Emily woke up, I was already 2 states away, checking into a modest apartment I'd found online. It wasn't much, bare walls, thin carpet, but it was mine. I had enough money to stay afloat for a while, thanks to the savings I'd quietly siphoned away. I had no plan for the long term, but for now, survival was enough. I didn't turn my phone on for 2 days. When I finally did, it was flooded with missed calls and texts. Most were from Emily, her tone shifting from confusion to anger to panic. "David, where are you? What's going on? What is this note supposed to mean? This isn't funny. Call me now. You can't just walk out like this. What about the kids? You're being ridiculous." I didn't answer. Instead, I sent a single message to her and a few close friends. "I'm safe. I need time. Please respect my space." Then I turned the phone off again. Emily had no idea where I was, and I wanted it to stay that way. For years, she'd been the one in control, spinning lies, keeping secrets. This time, she would have to live with the unknown. But I wasn't done yet. Quietly, I began to unravel her web. I forwarded the screenshots of her conversations with Jake to a burner email account. From there, I sent anonymous messages to her close friends and family. Nothing inflammatory, just enough to expose the truth. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't protecting her either. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. A mutual friend, Rachel, reached out first. She didn't say much, just that she'd heard some things and wanted to check on me. Others followed, their concern genuine but awkward. They all danced around the truth, probably hoping I'd confirm what they already suspected. I didn't give them the satisfaction. Let them ask Emily. Let her explain herself. Then came the message I'd been expecting. It was from Jake's wife. "Hi, David. I know this is probably the last thing you want to deal with, but I think our spouses have been involved." I found some messages on Jake's phone. "I'm so sorry." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I had no anger left for Jake or Emily. They deserved each other. "Still," I replied, keeping it short and polite. I told her I understood, that she wasn't alone in this, and that I hoped she found peace. She thanked me and promised to keep me updated. It was strange, watching Emily's life unravel from a distance. Her friends pulled away one by one. Family members stopped posting happy comments on her social media photos. It was clear they knew, or at least suspected, the truth. I'd thought I'd feel satisfaction, but all I felt was exhaustion. Betrayal takes more out of you than you realize. One night, weeks after I left, I got a call from Rachel. For a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "You're really gone, huh?" she asked, her voice soft. "I had to be," I said. There was a pause, then she added, "She's a mess, David. I'm not saying you should go back, I wouldn't if I were you, but she's falling apart. You might want to talk to her for the kids' sake." I didn't answer right away. It wasn't that I didn't care. I just didn't know if I could face her without breaking all over again. Finally, I said, "I'll think about it." After I hung up, I sat there in the dark, staring at the wall. Emily had made her choices, and I'd made mine. But the damage she caused wasn't so easy to escape. Weeks turned into a month. I'd settled into my new apartment, started a simple job at a hardware store to keep myself busy, and kept my distance from the chaos I'd left behind. I avoided social media and ignored most messages. It felt better that way, cleaner. But I couldn't escape the lingering weight of everything that had happened. One evening, I checked my email out of habit. Among the usual spam and promotions was a message from Emily's best friend, Sarah. We hadn't spoken much over the years, but her tone was blunt. "David, I'm not defending Emily, but she's losing it. She can barely function. She's called me crying every day, saying she doesn't know how to fix things. The kids are confused, and it's breaking them. I know you're angry, but maybe you should talk to her." The mention of the kids hit me hard. I hadn't reached out to them since leaving. I justified it to myself, thinking it was better to let things settle first. But deep down, I knew I was avoiding the pain of seeing their faces and answering their questions. The next day, I bought a cheap prepaid phone and sent a message to Emily's number. "I'd like to talk to the kids. Let me know when it's a good time." Her reply came within minutes. "They've been asking about you every day. Can we video call tonight?" I agreed, but only for the kids' sake. That evening, the call connected, and there they were, my two little lights in the middle of all this darkness. They grinned and waved, bombarding me with questions. "Where are you, Daddy? When are you coming home? Did you go on an adventure?" I forced a smile, telling them I missed them and that I was staying somewhere new for a little while. I didn't have the heart to tell them the truth, not yet. Emily appeared on the screen briefly, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She said nothing at first, just gave me a small hesitant wave. I nodded but didn't acknowledge her beyond that. The kids didn't seem to notice the tension, which I was thankful for. After 20 minutes of chatting and laughing with the kids, I said my goodbyes. Emily stayed on the call after they left the room. "David," she started, her voice shaky. Don't," I cut her off. "This isn't about us. It's about them." She looked down, biting her lip, and nodded. "I'm sorry, okay? For everything." I didn't respond. Instead, I ended the call and set the phone aside, staring at the blank wall across from me. Her apology didn't mean much, not after everything she'd done. But for the kids' sake, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. Later that night, I sat down and wrote a letter to them. I didn't say much about the details, just that I loved them, that none of what was happening was their fault, and that I'd always be there for them, even if things felt different now. I mailed it the next morning, hoping it would bring them some comfort. For now, that was all I could do. The days dragged on after that call. I kept myself busy with work, trying to find some semblance of normalcy, but every moment away from the kids gnawed at me. I'd done the right thing by leaving, I was sure of that, but the price was higher than I'd anticipated. Emily sent me messages almost daily. They ranged from long, tearful apologies to desperate pleas for me to come back. Sometimes she sounded angry, blaming me for abandoning her and the kids. I didn't reply to most of them. The few times I did, it was strictly about the kids. One night, she called. I stared at the phone for a long time before picking up. "I can't keep doing this," she said immediately. Her voice cracked, and I could tell she'd been crying. "You're gone, and I get it, okay? I deserve this. But the kids, they need you." "They have you," I replied evenly. "That's not enough," she snapped, her tone shifting to frustration. "David, I screwed up. I know that. But you can't just vanish and expect everything to be fine." I took a deep breath, gripping the phone tighter. "I didn't vanish, Emily. I left you. There's a difference. I'll always be there for the kids, but I can't live under the same roof as you anymore." There was a long silence on her end. I could hear her breathing, uneven and shaky. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there any chance at all for us?" "No," I said firmly. "You made your choice, Emily. And I've made mine." She didn't argue after that. Instead, she just hung up, leaving me alone with the echo of her desperation. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But it wasn't for her, it was for the kids. They didn't deserve this. A week later, I arranged to meet them. Emily reluctantly agreed to drop them off at a nearby park. I arrived early, nerves twisting in my stomach. When her car pulled up, the kids jumped out and ran straight to me, their laughter filling the air. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of joy. Emily stayed by the car, watching from a distance. She looked like a shadow of herself, thin, tired, and hollow. I didn't approach her. Instead, I focused on the kids, soaking up every moment with them. We played on the swings, tossed a ball around, and laughed like nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew they felt it. Kids always do. When it was time for them to go, my son clung to my leg, begging me not to leave again. My daughter's eyes filled with tears, though she tried to be strong. I knelt down, holding both of them close. "I'm not leaving you," I promised. "I'll always be here. Even if I'm not at home, I'm still your dad, okay?" They nodded, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. As they got back into the car, Emily hesitated, her hand on the door. "David," she said softly, not looking at me. "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond. Instead, I watched them drive away, their little faces pressed against the back window, waving at me until they were out of sight. That night, I sat in my empty apartment, replaying the day in my head. I'd done what I could to be there for the kids, but it still felt like I was failing them. I couldn't go back, not to her, not to the life we'd built on lies. But moving forward felt impossible, too. I was stuck, caught between the past and a future I couldn't quite picture yet. For now, all I could do was keep going. One step at a time. Time didn't move the way it used to. Days felt like weeks, but weeks slipped by before I even noticed. My routine became mechanical. Wake up, work, go home, eat, sleep, repeat. The only breaks in the monotony were my calls with the kids. Those moments kept me grounded, even as everything else in my life felt adrift. Emily had stopped calling and texting as much. Maybe she'd finally realized there was nothing left to save between us, or maybe she was just too worn out to keep trying. Either way, I was relieved. Every interaction with her brought back memories I didn't want to revisit. One afternoon, I got a text from Rachel. "You should know people are talking. Emily's trying to tell her version of what happened. Thought you'd want a heads up." I stared at the message for a long time. Of course, she was spinning the story, probably painting me as the one who abandoned her and the kids without reason. It was what I expected, but it still hit a nerve. The idea of her rewriting the narrative, turning herself into the victim, made my blood boil. That night, I sat down and opened my laptop. The screenshots I'd taken weeks ago were still saved in my email. Messages between her and Jake, hotel confirmations, and more than a few incriminating photos. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I felt like I had no choice. I forwarded the screenshots to a few key people, Rachel, Emily's parents, and a mutual friend or two. I didn't add any context. The messages spoke for themselves. Within hours, my phone buzzed with responses. Rachel's was short and supportive. "Holy crap. I knew it was bad, but not like this. I'm so sorry you went through this." Emily's mom called me not long after. Her voice was trembling, a mix of anger and sadness. "David, I don't even know what to say. I can't believe she would do this. To you. To the kids. To all of us." "I didn't send it to hurt anyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just thought people deserved to know the truth." "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "She needs to face the consequences of her actions." The next morning, Emily called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed as soon as I picked up. "You're trying to ruin my life." I let out a bitter laugh. "You ruined your own life, Emily. I'm just making sure people see the truth." "You didn't have to humiliate me," she snapped. "Do you even realize what you've done? My parents won't talk to me. My friends are pulling away. You've turned everyone against me." "They're not against you, Emily. They're against what you did. Maybe you should think about that." Her voice cracked, and I could hear the tears starting. "You're being cruel, David. I made a mistake. Is that enough to destroy everything? A mistake?" I repeated, incredulous. "This wasn't a mistake, Emily. It was a choice, 1,000 little choices over months. You didn't just trip and fall into someone else's bed." She sobbed quietly on the other end, but I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. Just a cold, empty space where my love for her used to be. "I'm not doing this for revenge," I said after a long pause. "I'm doing it for the kids. They deserve better than lies." She didn't respond. After a moment, the line went dead. I expected to feel some sense of satisfaction, but it didn't come. Exposing her lies hadn't healed anything. It didn't fix the ache in my chest or the hole she'd torn in my life. All it did was shift the weight slightly, like rearranging a load that was still too heavy to carry. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, staring at the photos of my kids on my phone. I didn't know how to rebuild my life yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I would do whatever it took to make sure they were okay. Even if it meant facing Emily again. Even if it meant stepping back into the mess I'd left behind. For them, I'd find a way. For weeks after the fallout, the air felt clearer, though the tension between Emily and me simmered quietly in the background. The kids were my only focus now. Every video call with them was a reminder of what mattered most. They didn't care about the drama between their parents. They just wanted their dad back. Emily had stopped messaging me after our last heated exchange. I assumed she was licking her wounds, trying to figure out how to manage the damage I'd unleashed. But one Friday night, just as I was settling in with a cheap beer and an old movie, my phone buzzed. It was her. "Can we talk? Please." I stared at the message for a long moment, debating whether to ignore it. Against my better judgment, I replied, "What do you need?" Her response came quickly. "It's about the kids. Can we meet in person?" Something about her tone caught my attention. I agreed, but I set boundaries. A public place, nothing personal, just a conversation about the kids. She agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near my apartment. The next morning, I arrived early, ordering a black coffee and sitting by the window. Emily walked in a few minutes later, looking exhausted. Her makeup barely covered the dark circles under her eyes, and her once confident posture was now slumped. She spotted me and hesitated before approaching. "David," she said softly, sitting across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "What's going on?" I asked, breaking the silence. She clasped her hands on the table, fidgeting with her wedding ring, something she still hadn't taken off. "The kids are struggling," she began. "They miss you, and I don't know how to help them." I felt a pang of guilt. As much as I tried to stay connected, I knew my absence was hard on them. "I'm trying to be there for them," I said. "I call, I send letters, but—" "It's not the same," she interrupted. "They need you around, David. They need their dad." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "And what do you expect me to do, Emily? Move back in? Pretend everything's fine?" She winced at my words but didn't argue. "No. I know that's not possible. I don't know how to do this without you." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the messages, the lies, the betrayal. This was the bed she made. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. "But I'll do whatever I can for the kids. We'll figure out a way to make this work." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't deserve your help," she whispered. "But they do." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. I didn't know if it was genuine or just another manipulation, but it didn't matter. The kids were my priority, not her. We spent the next hour hashing out a plan. More regular visits, a set schedule for calls, and a shared calendar for their activities. Emily seemed relieved, though I could tell the reality of our new dynamic was sinking in. As we stood to leave, she hesitated, then said, "Thank you, David, for being a good dad." I didn't respond. I just nodded and walked out, leaving her standing alone in the coffee shop. That night, as I packed a small bag for my upcoming visit with the kids, I realized something had shifted. The anger I'd been holding onto so tightly wasn't as sharp anymore. It was still there, simmering under the surface, but it didn't consume me like it used to. Maybe it was the kids. Maybe it was the clarity that came with leaving. Or maybe I was just tired of carrying the weight of it all. Whatever it was, I felt the first faint glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not for Emily or our marriage, but for myself and the life I still had ahead of me. The first visit with the kids, since the coffee shop meeting, was bittersweet. Emily brought them to a park halfway between her place and mine, sticking to the schedule we'd agreed on. She stayed by the car, giving us space, though I caught her glancing over a few times. The kids were ecstatic to see me, clinging to my legs and talking over each other in their excitement. My daughter showed me a drawing she'd made of our family, and my son proudly told me about a spelling test he'd aced. They didn't mention anything about the separation, but I could tell they felt the cracks forming beneath the surface. We played for hours. A simple game of tag turned into an epic chase across the park, with my son giggling uncontrollably as I scooped him up and spun him around. My daughter insisted we sit on the swings, and she talked about her friends, her favorite teacher, and a class project she was working on. For those precious hours, it felt like everything was normal again, like I hadn't walked out, like Emily hadn't betrayed me, like our family wasn't shattered. But as the sun began to set, reality crept back in. When it was time for them to leave, my son hugged me so tightly I thought my heart might break. "Can we do this again tomorrow, Daddy?" he asked, his voice small. I knelt down, meeting his eyes. "Not tomorrow, buddy, but soon. I promise." My daughter hugged me next, burying her face in my chest. "I wish you could come home," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. "I know, sweetheart. I know." As they got back into the car, Emily looked at me through the window. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between sadness and guilt. I didn't wave or say goodbye. I just watched them drive away, their little faces pressed against the glass. Back at my apartment, the silence hit me like a wave. The laughter and chatter of the kids had filled a void I hadn't realized was so deep. Now with them gone, it felt like the emptiness was louder than ever. I sat on the couch, staring at the photos on my phone from the day. The smiles on their faces were real, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was failing them. No matter how many visits we planned, it wouldn't be the same as being there every morning when they woke up, every night when they went to bed. A text from Emily interrupted my thoughts. "Thank you for today. The kids needed that." I think I did too. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and started researching. Lawyers, custody arrangements, co-parenting strategies. I needed to find a way to be there for my kids without being tied to Emily. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was done feeling powerless. A few days later, Rachel called. "So, I ran into Emily yesterday," she said. "She's trying to play the victim, saying you're being cruel by not coming back. But people know, David. They know what she did." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I'm not trying to punish her, Rachel. I'm just trying to move on." "I know," she said. "But she's spiraling. And honestly, I think she's starting to regret everything." "She should," I said flatly. "But that doesn't change anything." There was a pause before Rachel asked, "Are you okay?" I hesitated. Was I okay? I wasn't sure. "I'm getting there," I said finally. As the weeks went on, I threw myself into the legal side of things. I met with a lawyer to discuss custody options and set up a solid plan for co-parenting. Emily didn't fight me on anything, which surprised me. Maybe she was too exhausted, or maybe she knew she didn't have the upper hand anymore. Our interactions became strictly about the kids, cordial but distant. She stopped trying to apologize, stopped trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. In some ways, it was a relief. In others, it made the finality of it all sink in even deeper. One night, as I was flipping through photos of the kids on my phone, a realization hit me. I was starting to feel lighter. The weight of the betrayal, the anger, the grief, it was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating as before. I was learning to live with it, to move past it, even if the scars would never fully heal. For the first time in months, I felt like I could see a future. Not the one I'd planned, not the one I thought I'd have with Emily, but a future nonetheless. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The visits with the kids became regular, alternating between weekends at my apartment and outings to the park. I rented a little 2-bedroom unit to give them a space of their own, even though they weren't with me full-time. Setting up their rooms was one of the few things that brought me real joy during that period. My son insisted on superhero posters, and my daughter picked out a bedspread covered in bright flowers. They helped me hang up the decorations, and we laughed as the tape kept falling off the walls. For a moment, it felt almost normal, almost like the family life I'd lost. But every time I dropped them off with Emily, reality hit me all over again. She'd greet me at the door with a forced smile, her eyes darting nervously like she was expecting an argument. We kept things civil, but the air between us was heavy with everything unsaid. One Saturday morning, as I was getting the kids ready to leave, Emily stepped outside to talk to me. She stood on the porch, hugging herself against the crisp autumn air. "David," she started, her voice tentative, "can we talk for a minute?" I glanced at the kids, who were buckling themselves into the car, and sighed. "What is it?" She hesitated, looking at the ground. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I need to say this, again. I'm sorry. For everything. Not just for what I did to you, but for how I hurt the kids. I see it now, how selfish I was. And I hate myself for it. Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. For a brief moment, I almost believed her. I appreciate the apology, I said, my tone even. But it doesn't change anything. I know, she said quickly, her voice breaking. I just needed you to hear it. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. She lingered for a moment, as if waiting for some kind of absolution, but when it didn't come, she stepped back inside. I watched the door close behind her, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Later that day, I took the kids to a pumpkin patch. My son ran ahead, pointing out every oddly shaped pumpkin he could find, while my daughter stuck close, holding my hand. We carved them together that evening, spreading newspaper across the living room floor and making a mess with pumpkin guts. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed without reservation. As the kids fell asleep that night, tucked into their new rooms, I sat on the couch and stared at the glowing jack-o'-lanterns we'd placed in the window. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful, like maybe I was finally building something solid again. The peace didn't last long. A week later, Rachel called with news that shook me all over again. Have you heard about Jake? She asked. No, I said cautiously. What about him? He and his wife are splitting up, she said. Apparently, she found out he was still seeing other women, including Emily. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Still? I asked, my voice sharp. After everything? Yeah, Rachel said, her tone grim. I thought you'd want to know. I hung up and stared at the wall, my mind racing. All this time, Emily had been acting like she was trying to put the pieces back together, trying to make amends. And yet, she was still tangled up in the same mess that destroyed us in the first place. That night, when Emily called about the kids, I couldn't keep it in. So you're still seeing Jake? I asked bluntly. There was a long silence before she sighed. Rachel told you, didn't she? Does it matter who told me? I snapped. You've been pretending like you want to fix things for the kids, and all the while, you're still involved with the guy who blew up our marriage. It's not like that, she said defensively. I wasn't trying to fix things with you, David. I was trying to fix myself. By staying with him? I shot back. That's some real progress. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I know I've screwed up more than I can ever fix. But I've tried to be better for the kids. That's all I can do now. Then do it, I said coldly. Because they deserve better than this. I ended the call before she could respond, my hands shaking with frustration. I didn't care what Emily did with her life anymore. She was her own problem. But I couldn't let her drag the kids through her chaos. Over the next few weeks, I focused on strengthening my bond with the kids. I signed up for a co-parenting class, not because I wanted to work with Emily, but because I wanted to learn how to shield the kids from the fallout of her choices. Every small step I took toward building stability for them felt like a victory, no matter how messy the situation around us remained. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own story. After hearing about Emily and Jake, I made a choice. Her life was her own mess now. I'd already carried too much of it for too long. From that point on, I put every ounce of my energy into the kids. They were my anchor, the one part of this broken world I could still hold on to. The next visit was simple but perfect. We baked cookies in my tiny kitchen, flour ending up everywhere, and watched a movie curled up on the couch. My son fell asleep halfway through, and my daughter leaned her head on my shoulder, whispering, I love you, Daddy. For once, I didn't think about Emily. I didn't think about what she was doing, or who she was with. All I cared about was the warmth of those little moments, the kind that reminded me life could still be good. When I dropped them off at Emily's, I didn't stay to talk. Her eyes looked tired, like she wanted to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I just kissed the kids goodbye and drove away, feeling lighter than I had in months. It was small, but I was finally learning to let go. The routine settled in. Weekends with the kids were the highlight of my life. We built blanket forts, went on bike rides, and spent hours playing board games they insisted on but never finished. My apartment began to feel less like a place I escaped to and more like a home, our home, even if it was only for part of the time. Emily stayed in the background. Our exchanges were brief and focused solely on the kids. She'd stopped trying to apologize, and I stopped expecting her to. Once, she asked me if I could come inside when I dropped the kids off, but I declined without hesitation. There was no reason for me to be there anymore. Rachel called one night to check in. "She's different now," she said cautiously, referring to Emily. "I think she's really trying to figure herself out." "Good for her," I said flatly. "But that's her journey, not mine." Rachel didn't push it, and I appreciated that. I wasn't interested in hearing about Emily's redemption arc, real or not. My focus was on the kids and creating a life where her mistakes didn't define us anymore. The next weekend, my daughter asked me out of the blue, "Do you think Mommy's okay?" I paused, caught off guard by the question. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "She cries a lot when you're not there," she said softly. "I think she's sad." I pulled her close, brushing her hair out of her face. "Mommy is working through some things, but she loves you so much. You and your brother are what make her happy." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the truth they needed to hear. Whatever Emily was going through wasn't mine to fix. I'd let go of that weight a long time ago. All I could do now was make sure the kids never felt like they were caught in the middle of it. The next time I saw the kids, my daughter brought it up again. "Mommy says you don't talk to her because you're mad at her. Is that true?" Her big, curious eyes stared up at me, and for a moment, I felt like I was under interrogation. I knelt down to her level. "I'm not mad at Mommy," I said carefully. "We just have different things we need to work on. But no matter what, we both love you and your brother very much." "Do you miss her?" she asked, tilting her head. The innocence in her voice was a punch to the gut. I hesitated before answering. "I miss the way things used to be, but sometimes things change, and we have to find new ways to be happy." She thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "I like being with you, Daddy. You're fun." Her words melted away the tension I'd been carrying since her first question. "I like being with you too, sweetheart. You and your brother make me so happy." The rest of the day was spent at a local zoo. We wandered through exhibits, laughed at the monkeys, and took a million pictures. My son insisted on carrying a map and leading us, even though we got lost twice. It was one of those days that felt light, like maybe things were starting to fall into place, even if the pieces didn't look the way I'd imagined. When I dropped them off that evening, Emily came out to the car. She looked hesitant, holding the kids back at the door. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked. I glanced at the kids, then back at her. "Sure," I said reluctantly, stepping out of the car. She led me a few steps away, just out of earshot. "The kids have been asking questions," she began, fidgeting with her sleeves. "I've tried to explain things as best as I can, but I don't know if I'm saying the right things." "What kind of questions?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "About us. Why we're not together. If we'll ever be a family again," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "They're struggling, David, and I don't know how to make it easier for them." I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of frustration and sadness pressing down on me. "We just have to keep showing them we're here for them," I said. "That we're still their parents, even if we're not together." She nodded, biting her lip. "I just want them to be okay." "We both do," I said firmly. "And they will be, as long as we put them first." Emily looked down, her expression a mix of guilt and gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked back to the car, giving the kids a final wave before driving away. As I merged onto the highway, I couldn't shake the thought of my daughter's question. "Do you miss her?" I didn't miss Emily, not the person she'd become, not the lies, not the betrayal. But I missed the life we'd had before it all fell apart. And as much as I wanted to move forward, there was a part of me that would always mourn what we'd lost. The custody agreement was finalized, every other weekend and one evening a week. It wasn't ideal, but it gave me time with the kids, and that was what mattered most. That weekend, I took them to an arcade. My son spent what felt like hours at the claw machine, determined to win a stuffed animal, while my daughter dragged me to air hockey, giggling every time she scored. Back at my apartment, we settled in for dinner and a movie. As I cooked, my daughter wandered into the kitchen, tugging on my sleeve. "Daddy, are you never coming back to Mommy?" she asked softly. I crouched down, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's true, sweetheart, but I'll always be here for you and your brother. That will never change." Her lip trembled. I just want us to be one family again." I hugged her close, my chest tightening. "I know, sweetheart. I wish things were different too." That night, as I watched them sleep, I couldn't help but feel the weight of their sadness. I didn't regret leaving Emily, but the pain it caused them hit harder than I expected. Still, I promised myself one thing: I would do whatever it took to give them a life where they always felt loved and secure. The next day, as I dropped them off, Emily stood on the porch watching. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being such a good dad." I just nodded, waved at the kids, and drove away, their laughter still echoing in my mind. The next visit was quieter. We stayed home, baking cookies and playing board games. My son declared himself the master of Monopoly, though he quit halfway through, and my daughter painted a picture of our family, me, her brother, and a big sun smiling down on us. She didn't include Emily. I didn't ask why. Later, as they watched a movie, my daughter leaned over and whispered, "I like it when it's just us." I smiled, kissing her head. "Me too." When I dropped them off, Emily met me at the door. "They seem happier," she said softly, her eyes lingering on me. "They're doing okay," I replied. "We both just need to keep showing up for them." She nodded, her face unreadable. As I walked back to the car, my daughter called out, "See you soon, Daddy." Her smile stayed with me the whole drive home. The weeks began to blend together. Each visit with the kids felt like a small piece of the life I was rebuilding. I was learning to find joy in the little moments, the way my son laughed when I tickled him, the way my daughter lit up when she beat me at Uno. They didn't need grand gestures, they just needed me to be there. One night after dropping them off, I sat in my car for a moment, watching the house. Emily stood by the window, looking out, though I wasn't sure if she saw me. I thought about everything we'd been through, how we'd built a life together, and how it all fell apart. But as I drove away, I realized something: I wasn't angry anymore. There was still pain, still sadness, but the bitterness was gone. I didn't know what Emily's future looked like, but mine was becoming clearer. It was one where my kids came first, where I could move forward without carrying the weight of the past. And for the first time, I felt ready to take that step.